the band gets us into that place of worship through music. And if you wouldn't mind, as you're standing, would you please join me in the opening prayer? You can see it here on the screen. Let's pray together. Almighty and merciful God, through your bountiful goodness, keep us from all things that may hurt us, that we, being ready in both body and soul, may cheerfully accomplish those things you command. In Jesus Christ our Savior. Amen.
Good morning, everybody. I'm chasing after you, no matter what I have to do, 'cause I need you more and more. Help me sing, I'm chasing after you, no matter what I have to do, 'cause I need you more and more. Say it again, I'm chasing after you, no matter what I have to do, 'cause I need you more and more. I'm chasing after you, no matter what I have to do, 'cause I need you more and more. More and more. More and more. More and more. We need you more and more. More and more. More and more. Come on, y'all, let's chase it together. I'm chasing after you, no matter what I have to do, 'cause I need you more and more. I'm chasing after you, no matter what I have to do, 'cause I need you more and more. More and more. More and more. We need you more and more. More and more. More and more. More and more.
We can see that God, you're moving a mighty river through the nations. Young and old, return to Jesus. Fling wide you heavenly gates. Prepare the way of the risen Lord. Open up the doors and let the music play. Let the streets resound with singing. Songs that bring your hope and songs that bring your joy. Dancers who dance upon injustice. Did you feel the darkness tremble when all the saints join in one song? All the streets flow as one river to wash away our brokenness. And here we see that God, you're moving. A time of jubilee is coming when young and old return to Jesus. Fling wide you heavenly gates. Prepare the way of the risen Lord. Open up the doors and let the music play. Let the streets resound with singing. Songs that bring your hope and songs that bring your joy. Dancers who dance upon injustice. Let me hear the voices. Open up the doors and let the music play. Let the streets resound with singing. Songs that bring your hope and songs that bring your joy. Dancers who dance upon injustice. One more. Open up the doors and let the music play. Let the streets resound with singing. Songs that bring your hope and songs that bring your joy. Dancers who dance upon injustice. Please be comfortable.
So before we turn our attention to God in prayer, Aaron, I want you to know I did introduce myself to your mom, dad, and your brother, and I thought I recognized them, but then of course I didn't. But now, if your dad and brother had a man bun like you, I would have known immediately that they were related, or a man ponytail. Either one, I would have known. Anyway, so good that you were with me. So as we turn our attention to God in prayer, a number of the prayer concerns are listed in the insert in your bulletin. Let me highlight two of those, and then I have a number of prayer concerns I want to share with you, and hopefully you will then share with me some prayer joys. So the first one there is the family of Bill Bell. Bill and Kathy, a staple here for years and years and years, sit back there, were married, sitting, and we just love them so much. But I told you last Sunday that Bill had died, and we had a service yesterday. It was a good service, but Kathy is really mourning. So if you could lift Kathy Bell up in your prayers. I just think it's tough to be somebody's caretaker for almost 10 years, and then suddenly you don't have that role anymore. So please be thinking of her today and the days ahead. And the second prayer request, the second update is that second request there of Mike, the son-in-law of Joanne Lewis. He's home now, but he's still dealing with that meningitis, and so he continue to lift him up in your prayers. I appreciate it. So, let me share with you some more concerns, right? Things that are not in the insert and prayers that I hope that you will include in your prayer time today and the days ahead. I try to keep these moving because there's a number of them. Tomorrow, Doug Forbes, F-O-R-B-E-S, Doug Forbes, will have additional brain surgery. You may recall that Doug had a brain TIA, brain bleed, about 6 months ago, and it was very serious. He came through that, but now he's had a series of surgeries to kind of correct some of the damage. This is going to be his 4th surgery, and they don't think they're done yet. So be thinking of him tomorrow. He's about 44 years old at the time. Be thinking of him as he goes to surgery. Second prayer concern is for the family of Jennifer Arnold. So Jennifer Arnold, 42 years old, died suddenly this past week of an episode of diabetes, just juvenile diabetes. Jennifer's parents and aunt and uncle and grandma all drove to our first service. But she's 42. That's bad. She'd just gotten married 5 years ago. She has a 2-year-old son and a 4-year-old son. And they're just devastated. And then I get a text this morning that her husband, who's mourning the loss of his wife, was rushed to the hospital and is in surgery now for an appendectomy. So this guy is, this whole family is really stressed out. So if you could just remember, even if you don't remember a name, God knows who they are. So if you just lift up this family who's grieving the loss of a mom and a wife. Sarah Mitchell's in the hospital. Some of you know Sarah. So Sarah, if you're at Linworth, Sarah's always back in the kitchen fixing those delicious meals for us. And Sarah had a little heart episode last Sunday. They took her to the emergency room. They discovered that about every artery was like 80% blocked. So Friday they did a bypass surgery. But she's still in ICU, still kind of serious. So if you could think of Sarah, just if you thought Sarah is in the hospital after heart surgery, be with her. Her husband is really, as you can imagine, he's on pins and needles. And now just a few more. We're going to do these very quickly, and I apologize. But I think isn't this what we're about? Prayer. This is prayer and lifting up needs. Willis Mayhew. So Willis Mayhew, 63 years old. Her mom doesn't like it when I tell you this, but her mom is 93. She comes to our first service, sits back there about rejoicing, and Willis has now been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. So it's hard for a mom, 93 years old, knowing that her little daughter is critically ill. So anyway, Willis is going to have some chemo. So would you pray for Willis, please? Chemo gives her some quality of life and maybe years as well. And then the last. I'm sorry, I should put my glasses on. The last prayer request is for Brenda Melkor, our secretary. Brenda Melkor, Brenda's husband's brother, so Brenda's brother-in-law, had a son, struggled a little bit, and he died this past year, 28 years old. So the funeral is one. So please be thinking of him. So that's sadness. So I want to hear some joys. I'll give you a joy. I don't know how many of you know the Newcombs, Pam and Bob Newcomb. They have one son, Nicky. I've known Nicky since he was born. Nicky got married last year, and he and his wife had a baby yesterday, a little girl. No, I'm sorry, that's not true. The baby was born the 4th of July. They're calling her Yankee Doodle. They're calling her Yankee Doodle. I saw the pictures. It's our Yankee Doodle baby. So that's a prayer joy. So I want you to share a prayer joy. Did you have a prayer joy? We can't just have sorrow is what it is. But I'd like to have more prayer joy. More prayer joy? Somebody has prayer joy? Mary. I'm sorry. Oh yeah, that's right. They're going to go get their son. That's exactly right. When would they be back? Oh my gosh, that is a prayer joy, and we're going to pray for their safety here. How old is he? Oh, 3 years old. Fantastic. You're going to have a new grandbaby. Fantastic. That's fantastic. That's what we need to hear too. So anybody else? Anybody have a prayer joy? Yeah. Oh my gosh, yes. We've been praying for rain for how long? 4 months? 4 months. Fantastic. Thank you. And where is he? He's still in the hospital, right? Oh, he's home? Yeah. And they're in Nebraska? Oh, same thing. Well, it's out there. I don't know geography, but thank you. That's great. Eric. Yes, that's right. Let's pray for VBS. That's exactly right. I tell you, I think, how many of you actually attended VBS when you were small? Really, you attended. Do you remember the songs? Do you remember those songs that you learned in VBS? I still remember the Bible, that B-I-B-L-E. I learned that in Vacation Bible School. Now that was almost 55 years ago. So imagine the power of Vacation Bible School to change a child's life. So pray for them, Vacation Bible School, and pray for the teachers. And now I'm going to ask you just quiet yourself, and I'll lead you in this. Loving God, who through Christ we know to be closer than a friend and dearer than a sister or brother, more of a caring parent or mother, we feel so comfortable in your presence, daring to call upon you in this time of worship and to voice to you our needs. And there are needs. You've heard many of those needs of people who are simply out of breath trying to keep up with the demands of living. What about that young man, God, who's lost his wife of 5 years with 2 little boys and now in the hospital himself? That's just one of many of men and women out of breath, just trying to keep pace with the demands. There are others among us, or people that we know who are just about to give up on something because the endeavor is just taking their toll on their health or maybe their relationships in their lives. And then there are simply others, oh God, who are in sorrow today for whatever kind of loss, the loss of a loved one, or maybe the loss of a job. So you find many of us here, oh God, so many of us voicing to you our needs of sorrow and lament and of simply being out of breath. But we also give you thanks that in the midst of that we praise you for the great and good gifts that we have, the gifts of babies and grandchildren, the gifts of fine music that we hear every Sunday. As you once came upon the multitudes ministering to their needs, we ask that you come among us, that you fill us with new hope and new courage, that you give us power to live with integrity, that you give us the resolution to continue to call upon you in times of distress and in joy to be the Lord of our lives. Hear our prayers, O God, but not just for this church and ourselves, but for others, other churches and other missionaries and inner city dwellings and inner city issues where others are helping people deal with such difficult issues of conflict and poverty and drug abuse. We pray for them all and ask that you bless them. Come hear us now, O God, and bless us that as we leave here, we are truly empowered to be your children in a world that so desperately needs to hear your word. We ask in thy name. Amen. I'm going to ask Jesse to come up forth. He's going to share with us some announcements.
Well, you sort of touched on one of the announcements already. We do have VBS coming up this week. So are we excited? Yeah. We're going to have a couple hundred kids in this place ready to do crafts and play games and sing and dance and be full of joy, all in the name of honoring God. How cool is that? So if you have missed, if you're like, wait a minute, VBS crept up on me, I haven't signed up yet, Miss Alicia is here today, and I am sure she'd be happy to have you on board. So don't miss out on participating. If you can't be here, lift these children and the leaders and everyone that will be here up in your prayers to support them, please. So with that, next Sunday, we're going to celebrate all that they've learned and done with VBS Sunday. So make sure you're here. The 9 o'clock service will have some preaching, and at the end of that service, we'll hear from the kids a couple of songs, right? At the end of that service. And then this service will be a full-on celebration of everything that they've learned and done. So you don't want to miss it. Also, the very next Sunday, we'll go from hearing from our children to hearing from our youth. We had a retreat this weekend, Friday into Saturday, and we began planning a great service. Let me tell you, this trip was transformational. They saw many things and experienced many things, and they cannot wait to share that with you. So please be here on the 29th, ready to hear from our youth about that experience. Also, on the 29th, not to be forgotten, if you or someone you know, or if you have a child that's interested in baptism, we are offering our baptism class. So we'd love to have you join us on the 29th. Now that is on your blue card, and if you can, go ahead and sign up. We'd love to know that you're coming. So with that said, that's our announcements for this morning. I'd like to invite our hospitality team forward to collect this morning's tithes and offerings.
While our ushers are collecting our morning offering, I want to just say good morning to everyone and say while Pastor Jean was receiving joys from the congregation, I get to share a joy of my own, and that's being back from a couple weeks in northern Michigan with Wendy and Audrey. We enjoyed a great vacation together and even took a few days for a boys' trip with my brother and dad to Las Vegas. So if you can think of two more different places in the world than the northern Michigan woods and wilderness and Las Vegas, so I'd love to hear from you. So we have that joy. I know Pastor Gene's celebrating the joy of going to Maine for a couple weeks. He leaves on Wednesday, I believe, and Pastor Jessica gets to have the joy of going to licensing school later today, which I'm sure will also be a very relaxing time for her. So especially pray for Jessica if you can. So today, our sermon series, we finished the Beatitudes, and I hope this series has been as meaningful for you over the last 8 weeks as it has been for us as pastors to go through this series, these revolutionary teachings of Jesus that are really the core and the foundation of the New Testament and of our faith. And today, as we have for the rest of the series, we're going to share this Beatitude, the final 8th Beatitude, alongside the rest so that you can see the fullness of what Jesus teaches. So here it is, beginning in verse 1 of the 5th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Well, as we reach the end of this series on the Beatitudes, we have seen Christ preach to us about being poor in spirit and encouraging meekness. We have seen Christ challenge us to hunger and thirst for righteousness and to be pure in heart. We have seen Jesus promise that those who mourn would receive comfort, and those who are merciful will be shown mercy. We've seen Jesus call for us to go and be peacemakers in the world. And now we encounter this last of the Beatitudes, and it really is a bit of a jolting ending. If you were to think of it as a movie, this would be, I think, the twist that comes at the climactic ending, because here what Jesus lays upon his audience may cause their heart to skip a beat. Because for as much as Jesus challenges us throughout the Beatitudes, as much as Jesus wants to flip the script on the way we see the world, as much as Jesus calls us to a deeper and more meaningful place in our faith, I think this ending would have caused the disciples and everyone listening that day to gasp, because it is so dramatic. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. You can imagine, if you will, maybe the disciples listening to Jesus that day were thinking to themselves that they could rally around the idea of being a little bit meeker. They could get behind being a peacemaker. Sure, they could hunger and thirst for righteousness, but could they go all the way to risking persecution for the kingdom of heaven? Or would that final test, that final chapter, that final beatitude, would that be one step too far for them? Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, it's important to note that Jesus does add in that qualifier. He says, persecuted because of righteousness. It's not just a blanket statement. He says that because of righteousness. I think first that describes Jesus himself, persecuted because of righteousness. Surely he experienced that in his own life. Second, it is a reminder for the strength and focus needed for those disciples listening that day to be true, authentic, committed followers of Christ in their lives as well. I think Jesus ends the disciples with this dramatic statement about persecution because he knew it would be part of his journey. He knew that was what was lying ahead. And we see throughout the Gospels several occasions where Jesus preaches and warns his disciples about the persecution that may come, because he knew they ultimately, if they stayed true to his teaching, his gospel, he knew they would experience it as well. See, persecution has always been part of the Christian faith. Jesus even mentions that it goes back to the prophets as well. We see it with Jesus. We see it with his disciples. We see it with the early church in Rome as they had to worship in underground churches. We see it under the Emperor Nero when Christians were thrown into the Colosseum for sport and for entertainment. We even still see it today in places around the world where Christians are persecuted on an everyday basis. Even with our mission partners in Laos, our pastors in the United Methodist Church face the constant threat of imprisonment or worse for doing the same thing that I'm doing right now in sharing the gospel. It happens today. Maybe you've even encountered one of the most influential writings throughout Christian history, which is Fox's Book of Martyrs, that tells tales throughout the generations of people who have been serving Christ and been willing to risk it all. But there's even Christian leaders that you may not expect or realize that experience some form of persecution in their ministries. Now, believe it or not, one of the individuals who experienced persecution in their ministry was the founder of the Methodist movement, John Wesley himself. Now, even before Methodism took hold, Wesley was stirring up a bit of trouble in the Church of England through his reform efforts. Now, we may have shared in worship before that the term Methodist was first used in a pejorative way. It was used to make fun of Wesley and his followers and how methodical they were and how many rules they had for their meetings and just how committed they were to living a holy life. Wesley in his band meetings, his little small groups, he would always ask the first question, how is it with your soul? Wesley's colleagues and other people in the Church of England made fun of him for this. And eventually he took on that term Methodist as a badge of honor and the eventual name of his society. But the opposition to Wesley was much more than merely snickers of the crowd. You see, he faced very real opposition. Sometimes local clergy were even involved. And there were, get this, angry mobs that came out to oppose Wesley's preaching. You ever had an angry mob in a Methodist church service before? Okay, no hands, so please do not start today. That would be fantastic. But the Wesley Center tells of one instance where this did happen in the town of Walsall in England. I want to share this story with you. It really is quite unbelievable. The story goes that it was in vain for Wesley to speak, for the noise was like the raging of the sea. He was dragged along to the town. When he attempted to enter an open door, a man caught him by the hair and pulled him back. Wesley was then hurried through the main street from one end of town to the other. This was the town that Charles Wesley had found full of fierce Ephesian beasts 5 months before. Their hour had now come. Wesley felt neither pain nor weariness, but continued to speak to all who could hear. At last he stood at the door of a shop and gained a hearing. When he asked them to let him speak, many cried out, "No, no, knock his brains out, down with him, kill him at once." Knock his brains out, kill him at once. This is what John Wesley heard in trying to establish the Methodist movement. Now we know that those that were opposed to Wesley were not true Methodists because they did not first establish a committee to form the angry mob. They just jumped straight to the angry mob phase. Do you believe that? Angry mobs crying out to Wesley to knock his brains out? That is astounding to hear about someone in starting the Methodist movement. Now Wesley escaped this preaching endeavor after about 15 minutes before his voice finally went out and he ended unharmed in prayer. Now opposition against Wesley carried forward for several years until finally many of Wesley's followers and preachers were sent to do ministry in the United States, and it was the Christmas Conference of 1784. There's your Methodist history of the day, when the Methodist preachers and movement came together to launch the church that we know of today. But that church did not come without facing opposition and oppression and even persecution. So when Jesus preaches these words that we hear today in this final beatitude, it is not just something that was meant to be a historical relic or just kept in a box to that time and that day, because we think, of course, Jesus faced persecution in his disciples, but it is something that has stayed true throughout Christian history. It is something where these words still have meaning and relevancy today. Now, this focus on persecution may seem like quite the ending, but if we stop and think about it, theologically and practically, I think it makes sense, because if we view Jesus as using these Beatitudes to prepare his disciples to carry out his ministry, to carry out the gospel, we see the full picture, and that persecution was indeed part of it. Because after all, the life of Jesus of Nazareth ended with him arrested and killed and crucified because of who he was and who he proclaimed to be and the gospel that he taught. But that persecution ultimately gave way to a triumph in resurrection, and a triumph in ascension, and a triumph in the promise of salvation, the triumph of what's promised here in the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, in order to fully prepare the disciples to walk in his footsteps, Jesus must share with them this full truth and full reality. But that good news that even in the midst of persecution, there is blessing and there is God's kingdom. For through their persecution, through their trials that Jesus knows will come, he promises them the blessed presence and the full presence of God Almighty. And I think it's appropriate here that Jesus ties it all together, because if you remember, the very first beatitude, blessed are the poor in spirit, what is promised? It is the kingdom of heaven. Likewise, this last beatitude carries the same refrain, and it brings us full circle. You may remember what we talked about with the kingdom of heaven 8 weeks ago, that the promise then is still the same promise today, that the kingdom of heaven is both our future hope, our final destination, but it is also our present reality, because the kingdom is in our midst. The kingdom is here today. God does reign in the here and now today. And this kingdom was the focus of Christ through his preaching, his teaching, through his life. And it had to be because of the footsteps that he took, because of the journey that he was on. Because if he had ever wavered from that focus of God's kingdom and that ultimate purpose of being here, then it would have been, I think, a little bit easier to give in to the temptations along the way. Maybe those voices that he heard that encouraged him to build that earthly kingdom and take that power for himself, to use his divinity for those purposes, maybe he would have given in. Maybe that core wouldn't have been so strong, and perhaps that journey would have all been for naught had Jesus not made the choice each and every day to pursue the kingdom of heaven through whatever stood in his way. And I think Jesus, in preaching these Beatitudes, shows us what his core values on that journey truly were. Because how many times did we see Jesus where he was poor in spirit, where he was willing to humble himself and wash the feet of his own disciples? How many times did we see him that he showed a hunger and thirst for righteousness when he refused to turn stones into bread in the desert? What about when we see Jesus mourn? Jesus weeps. He cries for his friend Lazarus. We see Jesus' meekness and his purity of heart through his teachings, through his reaching out to those who society rejected and neglected. We see Jesus be a peacemaker and encourage peace by teaching his followers to turn the other cheek. Jesus lived out these Beatitudes. They were the foundation of his gospel and his ministry. And I think that full picture of the Beatitudes shows us that the kingdom of heaven is not just at the beginning and ending of it, it's all through it. Because these Beatitudes lead us to that place. I think it's why Jesus has that refrain to begin and to close, because if we are to take this final beatitude, these commandments, these teachings of Jesus, they are the ultimate encouragement to pursue God's kingdom. That if we pursue righteousness, then God is truly on our side and the kingdom of heaven could be ours, no matter what persecution, no matter what obstacles may be thrown in our path. Jesus wants to emphasize this point so much that he does something here for this final beatitude that we don't see him do anywhere else through these teachings. He actually follows it up with a second statement where he says, "Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." He reminds us and emphasizes that point. Great is your reward in heaven. Because above all else, as much as the Beatitudes teach us a way to live, I believe that even more so, the Beatitudes lead us to values that are eternal. For our life, our faith, everything that we know about God rests on the promises of Christ in the gospel. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German theologian, said in a sermon that the road divides for eternity at the gospel. And it is an everlasting gospel, a gospel that is the sole and enduring comfort to the congregation of the faithful. Bonhoeffer was someone who was persecuted because of righteousness, because he, as a German, stood up to the Nazi regime, and he lived out these words that he preached, because in the face of the greatest evil, the most dangerous threat, he had to make the choice to stand on the eternal side of the gospel, even facing death in a Nazi camp. And that gospel was indeed Bonhoeffer's enduring comfort now and forevermore. That is this gospel that these Beatitudes in the Christian life hinge upon. So as we move forward from this series, I think we have to ask ourselves, what now do we make of these revolutionary teachings of Christ? What do they really mean to us, so that we just don't leave from here and go on to the next thing, forgetting everything that Jesus has told us about through these Beatitudes? What do these Beatitudes really mean for us now and for the life beyond? And are we really willing to live these Beatitudes out to their fullest extent? Well, I believe this. As we close this series, these Beatitudes fundamentally are meant to empower us. They are meant to empower us to show us the way for the Christian life, to give us the tools necessary to live as Christ would live, to walk as Christ would walk, to do the ministry that Christ would have us do. Through these Beatitudes, Jesus gives us a roadmap to God's kingdom. This is it. This is the closest thing in the New Testament, the closest thing that we'll see to the Ten Commandments of all. I think that's really a good way to view these Beatitudes, that really they are the commandments of the New Testament, because these should be the standards that we lean upon, that we base our faith around. It is meekness, it is mercy, it is righteousness, it is grace, it is strength, it is holiness, it is the way of Christ himself. It is the promises that come through these Beatitudes, the promises of God's comfort, of God's mercy, of God's kingdom. God's kingdom comes alive through these Beatitudes, and they come alive through you and through me. So it is up to us as Christ's disciples in the world today to bring these Beatitudes back to the forefront of the Christian life. Ask yourself this: how would our church and our world really be different if we made these teachings of Jesus a reality? Think about all the disputes and the controversies and the rivalries that take place in our world. Think about those things that exist within our own denomination, within this Methodist movement that started with Wesley's preaching so long ago. They're real and they exist. And all too often it's easy to get caught up in despair over how many divisions we see throughout the world. But what if we chose the way of Christ through the Beatitudes? Now, I know what you may be thinking. We're only one church. I'm only one person in one part of Northwest Columbus. And what difference would it really make? Well, I would beg you to consider that it has to start somewhere. That real change in our world has to start somewhere. So why not here? Why not with us? Why not with our lives and our faith and our church and our community and our city? Because just consider how much more fruit we could bear as a people, as followers and disciples of Christ, if we were just a little poorer in spirit. How much closer would we be as a community if we chose to mourn together with one another? How would our relationships around us in every facet of life improve and get better if we were just a little bit meeker? What blessings would we receive if we truly focus our hunger and our thirst for righteousness? How much more forgiving could we be? How much more reconciliation could we encourage if we were just a little bit more merciful? Where would the new places be? The new exciting places where we would see God? We could be purer in heart. Imagine the celebrations that would take place, the unity that would exist amongst us if we truly worked to be God's peacemakers. Maybe if we did those things, we could stand in the face of any doubts, any skeptics, any persecution that would come our way, as we centered our focus on the word and the promise through these Beatitudes in God's kingdom. I pray that all of those things are not just rhetorical questions today, because when Jesus preached these words for the first time, a little over 2,000 years ago, these were not mere rhetorical devices. They had meaning, they had value, they were the keys to the Christian life. Can they have the same value and realism and relevance for us today as they had for the disciples so long ago, so that we could take to heart what it means to be poor in spirit, to mourn, to be meek, to hunger and thirst for righteousness, to be merciful, to be pure in heart, to be a peacemaker, and to be willing to stand up for Christ even in the face of persecution. I pray that it may be so, that these words of Jesus, these Beatitudes of Jesus, may be our roadmap to the kingdom of heaven as we live out the way and the ministry of Christ Jesus. So we invite the band forward. Will you join me in a word of prayer? Gracious and loving God, we thank you for these teachings of Christ, these revolutionary beatitudes. We can only imagine what the reaction would have been as those followers heard these words spoken for the first time. God, as we close this series, may these words be sown deep within our hearts and our soul and have the same impact, just as though we were there when Jesus was preaching, so that we could truly consider how groundbreaking and revolutionary these ideas are of being poor in spirit, of being meek, of hungering and thirsting for righteousness, of being pure in heart, of standing up for Christ in the midst of persecution. God, help these words and these beatitudes come alive in our hearts today so that we can come alive. Our church, our community, our world can come alive for the sake of you and your kingdom and your gospel. It's all these things we ask in the name of Christ Jesus. Amen. I invite you to stand and we'll sing together our closing song.
I'm not ashamed to let you know. I want this light in me to show. I'm not ashamed to speak the name of Jesus Christ. What are we sneaking around for? Who are we trying to please? Shrugging off sin, apologizing like we're spreading some kind of disease. Well, I'm saying no way, no way. I'm not ashamed to let you know. I want this light in me to show. I'm not ashamed to speak the name of Jesus Christ. This one points it to lost cause, Savior testimonies for church time. The other one states you better wait until you do a little market research. Well, I'm saying no way, no way. I'm not ashamed to let you know. I want this light in me to show. I'm not ashamed to speak the name of Jesus Christ. I'm not ashamed to let you know. I want this light in me to show. I'm not ashamed to speak the name of Jesus Christ. I'm not ashamed to let you know. I want this light in me to show. I'm not ashamed to speak the name of Jesus Christ.
Beatitudes. It starts in Matthew 5, goes all the way through Matthew 7. And I think it's appropriate to share with you the close of the Sermon on the Mount because I think it fits in with the close of this series. It's Matthew 7, verses 24 and 25. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. May these beatitudes, these teachings of Christ be your foundation, your rock, that you can lean upon and rest on now and forevermore. Amen.
I'm not ashamed